A single map could crown a king or destroy an empire. The most valuable treasure in the ancient world was not gold, but a secret path across the water or through the sand. For centuries, the greatest fortunes were built on hidden geography, on whispers of a safe harbor or the timing of a wind known only to a select few. This is the story of the secretive navigational routes that protected the ancient world's most lucrative monopolies. By the end, you will understand how the control of simple information, of a line on a chart or a landmark in a desert, became the ultimate weapon of economic power. We will uncover why a sea captain might sink his own logbook and how the night sky itself was used as a coded lock. Prepare to see history in a new way, not through the clash of armies, but through the silent, cunning war of maps and memory. What does it truly cost to hold a world-changing secret? That fortress was built on a single, powerful idea. A monopoly in the ancient world was not just a product you owned. It was a story you controlled, a complete narrative from the earth to the hands of a king. To hold a true monopoly was to command every single step of an impossibly long journey. You needed the source, yes, but you also needed the craftsmen who knew the secret of transformation, the packers who understood how to prevent spoilage, the merchants who could navigate foreign courts, and above all, the captains who knew the way. Break any one link in that chain, and the entire enterprise could collapse. This is why the route, the path through the wilderness or across the trackless sea, was the most critical point to secure. It was the invisible thread upon which the entire precious necklace was strung. Consider the legendary Tyrian purple, the color of emperors. The Phoenicians did not just own a few beaches where the murex snail lived. They owned the knowledge of how to harvest thousands of snails for a single gram of dye. They owned the vats and the precise, smelly fermentation process. But most importantly, they owned the sea lanes leading from their cities to Rome, to Greece, to Egypt. If a rival power learned those shipping routes, they could intercept the cargo, or worse, find the source themselves. So the route became a secret more guarded than the recipe. By mastering this entire chain, a culture could perform a kind of economic magic. They could make a common seashell vanish from the world's knowledge, only to reappear as a staggering luxury on a royal robe, its value multiplied 1,000-fold by the mystery of its journey. This control over the how and the where allowed empires to create artificial scarcity, to set prices not by cost but by legend. It was the original supply chain, and its weakest link was always the map. The desert itself became their vault. In the vast, sun-scorched landscapes of what the Romans named Arabia Felix, the kingdoms of Saba, and later the Nabateans did not simply trade frankincense and myrrh. They engineered an entire geography of secrecy around them. The source of these precious resins was a closely guarded region in southern Arabia, but the true power lay in the 1,000-mile journey north. The caravan routes were not mere suggestions on the sand. They were precise, hidden highways, as fixed and deliberate as a modern freeway, yet invisible to the untrained eye. Survival on these trails depended on knowledge passed down through generations, knowledge of a specific rock formation that signaled a turn, a canyon that offered shelter from the wind, and most critically, the location of wells whose water was the difference between life and a profound loss in the desert. To deviate from this sanctioned path was to invite disaster. This gave the controlling kingdoms an irresistible leverage. They could funnel all this priceless cargo through a single, manageable series of checkpoints and oases, taxing it at every stage. Imagine a toll road where you control every entrance and exit, and the only product allowed on it is worth more than gold. By mastering the route, they transformed a natural resource into a geopolitical weapon. Pharaohs and emperors needed this incense for their temples and rituals. It was not a luxury, it was a spiritual necessity. And so, for centuries, the Mediterranean world paid whatever price was asked, funding palaces and armies in the desert, all because a few tribes held the map to a fragrance on the wind. But how do you protect a secret written on water? On land, a hidden path could be marked by a rock or a canyon. The sea, however, leaves no trail. Its routes are written in the stars, the currents, and the color of the deep, knowledge held only in a captain's mind and his most precious possession, his logbook. This vulnerability sparked one of history's most fascinating deceptions, a cartographic blackout enforced not by kings, but by sailors themselves. Ancient mariners, especially the legendary Phoenicians, perfected the art of the misleading guide. They produced documents called peripli, sailing manuals that described coastlines and ports. Yet these were often works of deliberate fiction. A periplus might vividly detail a safe harbor, only to omit the crucial tidal information needed to enter it. It would chart a coastline faithfully, then populate the adjacent sea with tales of monstrous creatures, or warn of a literal edge of the world where the ocean poured into a void. The goal was not to inform the general reader, but to equip a trusted guild member with just enough truth, while planting seeds of terror in the mind of any rival or spy. As the Greek geographer Strabo recorded, a captain facing capture would often choose to sink his weighted logbook into the depths rather than let it be seized. This was not an act of panic, but a final, calculated business decision. The loss of the ship was a financial blow, but the loss of the route was the end of the monopoly itself. By turning their maps into traps and their knowledge into a sinking stone, these sailors transformed the Mediterranean and beyond into a locked maze. Only those who held the oral keys, the whispered truths passed from mentor to apprentice, could navigate its profitable corridors. This practice raises a profound question. How do we separate the geography of fact from the geography of fear? To find an answer, we must look at a specific case where this strategy built an empire not on land, but on the deliberate obscurity of a single, narrow sea. The Mediterranean was not a single sea to them, but a private circuit. The Phoenicians did not just sail from port to port, they designed an entire hidden economy upon the waves. Their monopoly was a layered masterpiece. On the surface, they traded in legendary goods, the vibrant Tyrian purple, the clear glass of Sidon, the strong cedar wood from their mountains. But beneath that was a deeper, more valuable commodity, the proprietary map of the world itself. Their colonies, from the mighty city of Carthage on the North African coast to smaller outposts on Sicily and Sardinia, were not merely settlements. They were locked waypoints, secure fueling stations, and warehouses placed at precise intervals along a confidential shipping lane. To trade with the Phoenicians was to be granted access to a node in their network, never to see the full schematic. This control of geography allowed them to perform an astonishing feat. They became the sole connecting thread between entire worlds that did not know the other existed. Their most guarded secret may have been a navigational discovery of staggering scale. Historians and ancient texts suggest that Phoenician vessels, venturing beyond the familiar pillars of Hercules, learned to ride a powerful Atlantic conveyor belt. They found the currents and prevailing winds that formed a giant, circular highway, sweeping ships north to the tin mines of ancient Britain and the amber forests of the Baltic, then carrying them back south with the riches. This Phoenician circuit transformed them from merchants into global information brokers. The empires of the Mediterranean, Egypt, Greece, and later Rome, craved tin to make bronze and amber for ornament. They had no idea where these materials originated, only that the Phoenicians could reliably deliver them. By holding the map, the Phoenicians created a perfect middleman monopoly. They bought low from isolated northern tribes who had no concept of the value their resources held in a southern palace, and sold impossibly high to emperors who were none the wiser about the source. The route was the lock, and they held the only key, a key written not in metal, but in the memory of the stars, the feel of the current, and the courage to sail off the edge of the known world. This model of informational control raises an intriguing question. What happens when the secret is not a path across water, but a schedule written in the sky itself? The night sky was not a guide for everyone. For the general sailor, the constellations provided a reliable compass, but for a monopolistic guild, the heavens presented an opportunity for a far more sophisticated lock. They practiced a form of celestial deception, creating a proprietary stellar law known only to their own. While most navigators followed the well-trodden path of the North Star, an exclusive trading family might teach its apprentices to steer by a subtle, unnamed cluster only visible at a certain hour, or to interpret the halo around a crescent moon as a secret signal for the perfect departure time. This knowledge was never written down. It was whispered from captain to pilot, a living encryption passed through generations. To an outsider spying on the deck, the navigator was simply looking up at the same stars as everyone else. But in his mind, he was reading a coded sequence, a celestial combination that unlocked the fastest current or the safest passage. The brilliance of this system was its inherent security. You could not steal a star. You could capture a ship and seize its maps, but without the oral key to decode the sky, the most valuable chart was useless. The route was protected by the universe itself, transforming the open ocean into a private road visible only to those who knew how to look. This principle of natural encryption did not just apply to the static stars, but to the very rhythms of the planet, to the great, breathing winds that could fill a sail or dash a ship against the rocks. The wind held a timetable more valuable than any chart. In the vast theater of the Indian Ocean, the ultimate trade secret was not a hidden island or a treacherous strait. It was a rhythm, the ancient, predictable pulse of the monsoon. For over half the year, the southwest monsoon blew steadily from Africa toward India, a powerful engine that could propel a ship across open water in weeks instead of months. Then, as if on a celestial command, the winds reversed, with the northeast monsoon offering a guaranteed passage back home. This was not a mystery to everyone. For centuries, this knowledge was the exclusive, guarded property of a network of Arab and Indian merchants. They did not just know the winds existed. They possessed the precise, experiential data of when to depart, which lunar phase promised the safest start, and how to read the subtle shifts in the sky that signaled the turn. This mastery of timing created a monopoly of speed. While competitors cautiously hugged the coast, making a single, laborious round trip per year, the masters of the monsoon could complete two. They could deliver the new harvest of Malabar pepper to Rome before their rivals had even reached the source. They controlled the flow of cinnamon, silk, and gemstones not with forts but with a calendar. The moment this secret leaked is famously pinned to a Greek explorer named Hippalus in the 1st century before the Common Era. Ancient texts credit him with discovering the direct monsoon route. In reality, this likely marks the point where a long-held corporate secret became public knowledge, perhaps through a captured pilot, a loose tongue in a foreign port, or an observative sailor who finally connected the atmospheric dots. Hippalus did not find a new wind. He cracked a code that had been encrypting trade for generations. This reveals a profound truth about ancient monopolies. Sometimes the most formidable wall was not made of stone, but of time itself. Controlling the schedule was as powerful as controlling the space. Yet, even the monsoon code could be broken. What happened when the secret was not a path or a schedule, but an entire civilization's willingness to vanish from the map? No merchant from Rome ever saw the mulberry trees of China. The legendary Silk Road was not a single, continuous highway where camels plodded from the Mediterranean to the Pacific. It was a vast, fragmented network, a relay race of secrecy where the baton of goods was passed from one closed hand to another. The true power did not lie in the long, empty stretches of desert, but in the critical pivot points, the few places where survival and progress were even possible. Control these choke points, and you controlled the wealth of continents. The most formidable of these were not cities, but passages through the roof of the world. The Pamir Mountains, often called the crossroads of Asia, were a labyrinth of high-altitude valleys and glacial passes where the air grew thin and the weather turned deadly in an instant. Knowledge here was not a convenience, it was the currency of life itself. A local guide from a mountain tribe knew which pass was clear of summer avalanches, where a hidden spring bubbled up beneath a rock, and how to navigate a glacier's ever-shifting crevices. This information was their monopoly. They sold not goods but safe passage, and they guarded the specifics of their routes as fiercely as any state secret. To attempt these mountains without such a guide was to invite a profound and silent end. This system of compartmentalization was the network's greatest security feature. A Sogdian merchant from Samarkand might know the route from his home to the Taklamakan desert oases intimately. He would lead his caravan to a walled caravanserai, a fortified inn in the desert, where he would negotiate with a Uyghur trader who knew the trails through the shifting dunes. That Uyghur trader would then hand the silks and spices off to a Chinese merchant at the Jade Gate, who knew the roads to the imperial capital. At each pivot point, the route reset. The previous guide turned back, taking his proprietary knowledge of the last leg with him. No single person, from Rome to Chang'an, possessed the complete map. This meant the system was incredibly resilient. Even if one kingdom fell or one route was compromised, the overall flow of goods could adapt, finding a new series of secret handoffs. The cost, of course, was staggering. Each intermediary added their tariff, their fee for safe conduct, their profit margin. The bolt of silk that began its journey for a handful of coins in Xi'an could be worth a fortune in Antioch, its value inflated by 100 guarded gates and 1,000 whispered directions. The Silk Road's genius was that it protected its greatest asset, the route itself, by ensuring no one could ever see the whole picture. It was a monopoly built on collective secrecy, a conspiracy of geography where everyone played a part, but no one knew the entire script. This raises a final, pivotal question. If fragmentation protected the overland routes, what was the ultimate fate of these ocean-spanning secrets? When did the age of navigational mystery finally come to an end? The greatest mapmakers understood that a blank space was an invitation. To truly guard a secret sea lane, you had to fill the void not with nothing, but with terror. Beyond the safe, charted waters of the Mediterranean, ancient texts and sailors' logs described a world designed by nightmare. West of the Pillars of Hercules, the Atlantic was not just unknown, it was said to be a boiling sea of mud where the sun sank with a hiss. Lurking there was Giron, a monstrous giant with 3 bodies, waiting to drag ships to a watery end. Sail south into the Indian Ocean, and you risked encountering islands of cannibals, or worse, magnetic mountains whose very rock would pull the iron nails from your hull, leaving your vessel to simply fall apart in the open sea. These were not the innocent superstitions of a fearful age. They were deliberate, strategic fictions, a campaign of cartographic disinformation. The goal was psychological warfare. By weaving these tales into the very fabric of geographic knowledge, a guild or a kingdom could build an invisible wall around their profitable routes. Why post a costly navy to patrol a distant strait when a well-told story about a sea serpent could keep every rival captain safely anchored in port? The fear of the unknown was weaponized, transforming empty ocean into a fortified moat. This practice reveals a cunning truth about ancient power. Control was not just about physical force, but about narrative control. Whoever wrote the stories, whoever defined the boundaries of the possible and the impossible, held a profound influence over the ambitions of others. A monster on a map was a cheaper and often more effective deterrent than a fleet of warships. It was a monopoly enforced by imagination. But what happened when this strategy of whispers and myths was adopted and amplified by the most powerful institution of all, the state itself? The ultimate evolution of this secrecy was its adoption by the throne itself. When entire empires became the cartographers, the map transformed from a commercial asset into an instrument of state power. The goal was no longer just profit, but permanent geopolitical advantage, and the method was a formal, institutionalized blackout of geographic truth. In the Great Library of Alexandria, under the Ptolemaic kings of Egypt, a fascinating contradiction existed. This was the greatest repository of public knowledge in the ancient world, a beacon of learning. Yet, historians believe that within its guarded archives lay a very different kind of document, a state-sponsored master chart of the Red Sea and the Indian Ocean. This chart was not for scholars. It was compiled from the confidential reports of every Egyptian captain who returned from voyages to the incense lands of Arabia and the spice ports of India. Each captain's log, with its notes on currents, safe harbors, and monsoon timings, would be used to update this single, authoritative, and utterly secret map. The Ptolemies understood that to control the flow of cinnamon and pepper into the Mediterranean, they first had to control the information about the paths those goods traveled. Public knowledge was celebrated, but proprietary geography was locked away, creating a monopoly enforced by royal decree. The Roman Empire practiced a similar duality. For its citizens, it produced magnificent public works like the Putinger Table, a detailed map of the empire's vast road network, symbolizing open access and control over the land. Yet, when it came to the sea lanes that supplied Rome with Indian spices or Chinese silk, official sources became curiously silent or deliberately misleading. Roman geographers might confidently describe the shape of India, but they would omit the precise sailing directions needed to get there efficiently. The source of the Nile, the origin of the grain that fed Rome, was a subject of endless speculation and mystery, a mystery the state had little interest in solving for the public. This was not an accident, it was policy. By keeping maritime routes vague, Rome protected the commercial interests of its key trading partners and, by extension, the stability of its own supply chains. It was an information firewall built not by merchants but by senators and emperors. This fusion of commerce and state security reached its most systematic form in China. During the Han Dynasty and later, spectacularly, under the Ming, nautical knowledge was classified at the highest level. Charts detailing the routes through the South China Sea and across the Indian Ocean to Africa were considered state secrets on par with military plans. The treasure fleets of Admiral Zheng He in the 15th century were the most powerful naval expeditions the world had ever seen, mapping coasts from Southeast Asia to the Horn of Africa. Yet, upon their return, the detailed records and charts from these voyages were meticulously gathered by the imperial court. When political winds shifted and China turned inward, these documents were not just archived, they were largely destroyed or hidden away. The purpose was clear: to protect the lucrative monopolies on silk and porcelain by ensuring no one else could replicate the journey. The state did not just guard a trade route, it attempted to erase the very knowledge that the route existed. This was the apex of the ancient logic of secrecy, where a line on a chart was not a guide but a sovereign secret, and the greatest threat to a monopoly was not a rival's army but a rival's map. So if empires could bury such powerful knowledge, how did any of these secrets ever come to light? What force was finally strong enough to crack these ancient, state-sponsored codes? The golden treasure of the North did not sparkle in a mine, but washed quietly onto cold, pine-fringed shores. Amber, the fossilized resin of ancient forests, was a sun captured in stone, and to the civilizations of the Mediterranean, it held a magical allure. Yet the true challenge of the amber route was never finding the material itself. It was surviving the journey to bring it south. This network of trails and riverways, stretching from the Baltic coast to the gates of Rome, was a monopoly built not on hiding the source, but on controlling a gauntlet of geography. The dense, old-growth forests of Germania were a world apart from the open desert or the wide sea. Here, the route was a narrow thread through a trackless, often perilous green darkness. Local Germanic and Celtic tribes held the indispensable knowledge, the secret of which river ford was safe in spring, which forest path avoided the territories of a rival clan, and where a trading post could be found for shelter and resupply. They did not just possess amber, they possessed the key to the land itself. By controlling the critical choke points, especially on major rivers like the Vistula, a single tribe could levy a toll on every piece of amber moving south. They created a bottleneck, a turnstile in the wilderness where all north-south traffic was forced to converge. This gave them a stranglehold on the entire luxury trade. The route was never static, it pulsed and shifted like a living thing. A conflict between tribes, the rise of a new chieftain, or simply the seasonal flooding of a river valley could render last year's safe passage impassable or deadly. Therefore, the most valuable commodity on the amber route was not the amber in a merchant's pack, but the current intelligence in his ear. The map was a temporary document, updated with whispers and warnings at each fortified settlement along the way. A merchant from the Roman world would venture only so far north before handing his goods and his trust to a network of local intermediaries. These intermediaries traded the amber southward in a relay, each step guarded by the fresh, proprietary knowledge of the terrain ahead. To attempt the entire journey alone without this purchased guidance was to invite a profound and silent end in the deep woods. The Roman Empire, recognizing the route's immense value, eventually sought to formalize this chaos. They did not conquer the entire path, but they secured its southern terminus, building forts and client relationships to stabilize the flow. Even for Rome, the ultimate power on the amber route lay not in legions, but in negotiated passage, in understanding that the real treasure was the permission to walk through the forest unmolested. This reveals a core truth of overland monopolies. Sometimes the secret was not a destination, but a temporary and fragile consensus on the way forward. The sea whispered its secrets in a language of rhythm and song. For the master navigators of the ancient world, the most vital charts were not drawn on parchment, but composed in verse and committed to memory through generations. This oral tradition was far more than simple storytelling. It was a sophisticated, living encryption system designed to protect the world's most valuable data. In the vast expanse of the Pacific, Polynesian wayfinders did not set sail with physical maps. They carried entire geographies in their minds, recalled through elaborate, rhythmic chants. These chants were precise navigational databases. A single verse might encode the star that rose over a specific atoll, the particular feel of a current that signaled an island was near, even the flight patterns of seabirds that could lead a crew to land over the horizon. The melody and meter were mnemonic devices, ensuring the information was recalled in perfect order, a critical sequence for survival on a voyage that could last for weeks. To an outsider, it was just a song. To an initiated apprentice, it was a detailed set of sailing directions to a homeland across thousands of miles of open ocean. This method created an unbreakable security protocol. You could not steal a song from a man's mind unless he chose to teach it to you. The knowledge was inseparable from the person, protected by tradition and trust. Across the world in the Mediterranean, a similar principle applied, but the cipher was written in the senses themselves. A Phoenician sailing master, teaching his successor, would not simply point to a headland on a sketch. He would describe the unique acoustic signature of the waves crashing through a sea cave at its base, a deep, resonant boom that could be heard over the wind before the rock was even visible. He would note the specific scent carried on the breeze, the smell of wild thyme from a slope or the distinct odor of a distant marsh. each aroma a landmark in a fragrant map. This language of the waves was utterly untranslatable to an outsider holding a stolen document. A rival spy could have a perfect drawing of the coastline, but without knowing which cave groaned at high tide or which hill released the scent of sage after a rain, he was navigating blind. This sensory code turned the environment into a living text, one that required a lifetime of apprenticeship to read. The profound vulnerability and strength of this system was its humanity. If a master navigator passed from this world without imparting his chance and sensory keys, that entire branch of knowledge, that specific path across the water, could vanish forever. The sea route died with him. This made the bond between teacher and student sacred, the most critical link in the entire chain of monopoly. It raises a haunting question: how many routes, how many ways of seeing the world were lost when a final keeper of a song took that knowledge to his resting place? This reliance on fragile human memory set the stage for the next great revolution, one that would promise permanence but would also shatter the ancient code of secrecy forever. A single tree could grow a fortune, but only in one place on the entire planet. In the volcanic soil of a handful of small islands in the Molucca Sea, the clove and nutmeg trees found their only possible home. This was not a monopoly created by kings or merchants, but by biology itself. The Spice Islands were a locked treasure chest, and for centuries, the key was a navigational secret guarded with a ferocity usually reserved for state secrets. The local sultanates of Ternate and Tidor understood their power came not merely from owning the orchards, but from controlling the perception of where they even were. To the outside world, these islands were phantoms. Arab and later Portuguese traders who managed to reach them were fed deliberate misinformation. False charts circulated through the ports of Asia and Europe, placing the islands in impossible seas, surrounded by whirlpools or mythical beasts. The true route through the intricate maze of the Indonesian archipelago, with its thousands of islands, hidden reefs, and unpredictable currents, was a living secret passed only to trusted captains. It was a living map written in the memory of a few families, a sequence of turns through narrow straits known only by the shape of a specific mountain against the sky. This knowledge was so valuable that the penalty for smuggling a single living seedling off the islands was not a fine, but a final and severe consequence. The goal was absolute. The monopoly had to be perfect, rooted in the earth and protected by legend. For a very long time it worked. The sultans grew immensely wealthy, their courts perfumed by the very commodity that funded their power. Cloves, once a rare luxury for preserving food and masking less pleasant scents, became in Europe a symbol of ultimate wealth, worth more than their weight in gold. The spice route from the Moluccas to the markets of Venice or Lisbon was the longest, most convoluted, and most profitable supply chain in the world, and its origin point was the best-kept secret in history. But no secret, no matter how fiercely guarded, can remain contained forever. The leak began with a cracked code. In the early 16th century, after years of failed expeditions, Portuguese explorers finally pieced together the true location of the islands. They did not conquer with overwhelming force at first, they arrived with maps. The moment that proprietary navigational data escaped its traditional keepers, it triggered a domino effect of catastrophic scale. The Portuguese, then the Spanish, and finally the Dutch engaged in a brutal, century-spanning war for control of a few specks of land. The Dutch East India Company, in its quest for total control, took the local strategy of secrecy to a chilling, industrial extreme. They systematized the terror. They not only continued the practice of executing anyone caught with a seedling, they went further, restricting cultivation to single islands and burning entire nutmeg plantations elsewhere to artificially inflate scarcity. They controlled not just the route to the islands, but every single ship that left them. The leakage of one navigational secret, the simple coordinates of a group of islands did not just shift wealth from one power to another. It ignited the entire age of colonial empire, redirecting the flow of global capital and drawing the map of the modern world. The Spice Islands prove a profound and unsettling principle. Sometimes the most powerful object in history is not a weapon or a treaty, but a correct set of sailing directions. The most powerful maps were the ones that lied. Ancient navigation relied on a fragile art called dead reckoning, a continuous guess based on speed, direction, and time. A captain would point his ship west, note the days at sea, and hope his estimate placed him near his destination. It was a system riddled with natural error, a vulnerability that monopolist navigators learned to exploit with brilliant cunning. They did not fight the imprecision, they weaponized it, building deliberate mistakes into their very instructions. Imagine a sailing manual, a periplus, given to a trusted guild member. It states clearly, sail west for 10 days to reach the fabled markets. An outsider who stole that manual would follow it to the letter, and he would fail utterly. Because the initiated captain knew the secret key, after 5 days he would turn his helm subtly southward, correcting for a powerful, hidden current that swept across the ocean floor, a current known only through generations of experience. That unrecorded turn was the difference between a harbor and a watery grave. This built-in error acted as a navigational checksum, a test of authenticity. If you did not possess the oral correction, you could not complete the equation. The route was protected not by a wall, but by a flaw in the official record. This practice turned the sea itself into a lock that could only be opened with a whispered half-truth. One of the most guarded applications of this technique was on the route to West Africa, a journey shrouded in such deliberate mystery that it would take centuries for Europe to pierce the veil. West of the Nile, the desert held a different kind of map. The trans-Saharan trade routes were not roads in any conventional sense. They were fragile agreements with an unforgiving landscape, written in the language of survival. For over 1,000 miles of scorching sand and rock, the only landmarks were secrets, the only signposts were memories. The true power here belonged not to the kingdoms that produced the gold or those that mined the salt, but to the nomadic Tuareg guides who held the desert's literacy. They could read the subtle, almost invisible cues that meant life, the slight depression in the sand that hinted at a subsurface water table, the specific type of desert grass whose roots pointed toward moisture, the pattern of wind-sculpted dunes that signaled a safe passage around a treacherous erg. This knowledge was their hereditary monopoly, a library written not on scrolls but in the collective memory of a people. A caravan master from the kingdom of Ghana, laden with gold dust to trade for vital salt from the north, had no choice but to place his fate and his fortune in their hands. The route itself was the traded commodity. The Tuareg did not sell transportation, they sold certainty in a world of lethal chance. A single wrong turn, a misremembered distance between wells, could transform a line of 1,000 camels and their drivers into a silent monument of sand within days. This gave the guides an unimaginable leverage. They could set the price for safe passage, dictate the schedule based on seasonal water levels, and even decide which empires could communicate with one another. By mastering the desert's invisible grammar, they controlled the dialogue between continents. The empires of West Africa, Ghana, and later the magnificent Mali understood this. Their legendary wealth, symbolized by the opulent court of Mansa Musa, was built not just on gold, but on a sophisticated partnership. They secured the southern termini of these routes, providing protection, markets, and organization, while respecting the Tuaregs' non-negotiable control of the sands in between. It was a perfect symbiosis of power, one ruling the source, the other ruling the path. This system created a trade so valuable it defied the very logic of the environment, moving tons of solid salt south on the backs of camels and carrying gold north in tiny, precious quantities. The desert, in its harshness, enforced the purity of the monopoly. There was no alternative, no back door. If you wanted to connect the Mediterranean world to the gold fields of the Senegal River, you had to speak the desert's secret language, and only a few families held the dictionary. This raises a pivotal moment in our story. What happens when the entire model of secret paths and whispered directions collides with a new technology, one that promises to make the invisible permanently and publicly visible? The stability of an empire rested on a daily delivery of bread. Rome, a city of over 1 million souls, consumed grain on an almost unimaginable scale, and its primary source was the fertile Nile Delta. This created a monopoly unlike any other, born not from luxury but from sheer, desperate necessity. The Egyptian grain route was the Roman Empire's single most critical supply line, a state-controlled artery that pumped the lifeblood of civilization directly into the heart of the capital. To secure it, Rome did not rely on merchant guilds or whispered secrets. It built a logistical machine of military precision and classified its inner workings as a matter of national security. The fleet that sailed this route was not a collection of private traders. It was the Annona fleet, a state-sponsored armada whose captains answered directly to the emperor. Their cargo was so vital that its safe passage was considered a public duty, overseen by a special official, the Praefectus Annoni. The operational knowledge behind this system was a protected imperial asset. The schedules were timed to the Mediterranean sailing seasons with exacting care. The loading procedures at the port of Alexandria were standardized to maximize hull space and minimize spoilage. Most crucially, the fleet's preferred sea lanes were carefully charted to avoid known pirate havens and treacherous coasts, creating a protected highway across the open sea. This was not merely about efficiency, it was about control. The free grain dole, the Annona, was the emperor's most powerful tool for maintaining peace and popularity in the restless city. A disruption in the grain supply meant empty bellies, which inevitably led to riots and direct threats to the emperor's power. Therefore, any threat to the fleet was treated as an act of war against the state itself. The Roman navy patrolled these lanes, and the knowledge of the fleet's movements, its vulnerabilities, and its timetables was guarded as closely as any military campaign plan. While the Mediterranean was a busy crossroads for all manner of trade, the specific art of moving millions of bushels from a single source to a single destination, year after year without fail, was a monopoly of practice and information. It demonstrated that the most powerful secrets were not always about acquiring rare treasures, but about mastering the mundane, life-sustaining flow of a staple. The empire's grandeur was built on marble and conquest, but its day-to-day survival was guaranteed by a secret, state-owned recipe for moving wheat across the water. A beautifully drawn map could be the ultimate decoy. In the late medieval world, as European kingdoms began to stretch their reach across the seas, a new kind of document appeared in the chartrooms of wealthy merchants and kings. The Portolan chart. At first glance, it was a masterpiece of public cartography, a stunningly accurate depiction of coastlines from the Black Sea to the Atlantic, crisscrossed by a spiderweb of straight lines called room lines that helped a navigator plot a constant bearing. These charts were copied, traded, and celebrated, but to the trained eye of a rival, they were also a brilliantly coded message about what the mapmaker truly knew, and more importantly, what he was choosing to hide. The Mediterranean basin was rendered with near-modern precision, every bay and headland meticulously recorded. This was a sea of open secrets, its routes common knowledge to any competent sailor. But then the eye would travel west beyond the Pillars of Hercules. The coast of Africa might simply fade into a decorative blank, or worse, curve abruptly eastward in a gross distortion, suggesting a sailor would soon arrive back in the Indian Ocean. This was not an error, It was a calculated omission, a cartographic silence that screamed a warning. The accurate parts of the map said, "This is safe, this is known." The distorted or empty parts said, "Beyond here lies proprietary information, and you are not privy to it." The Portolan was a paradox, a public document that functioned as a private ledger of knowledge. Its very beauty was a distraction from its deeper purpose. A chart commissioned by a Venetian trading family, for instance, might show the harbor depths of Alexandria in perfect detail, facilitating trade with their Egyptian partners. Yet that same chart could subtly shift the orientation of the harbor at Constantinople, a Genos rival, just enough to make a nighttime approach perilous for anyone relying solely on the map. The map was both a tool for the initiated and a trap for the uninvited. It communicated in a visual language of inclusion and exclusion, telling the viewer not just where to go, but who was allowed to know the way. This practice transformed the map from a mere guide into a statement of economic and political allegiance. To possess an accurate Portolan was to be part of a club. To be given one with deliberate flaws was to be told, in no uncertain terms, where the boundaries of trust were drawn. The age of shared geographic truth was dawning, but first, it had to pass through a long twilight of beautiful, persuasive lies. The hollow of a walking staff could hold the fate of an empire. When the great land routes to China were severed, first by the Sasanian Persians and then by the ascendant Arab caliphates, the Byzantine Empire in Constantinople faced a crisis that threatened more than just fashion. Silk was the fabric of state power, the material of imperial robes, church vestments, and diplomatic gifts. Without it, the very visual language of authority began to fray. Their response was not to build a bigger army, but to execute one of history's most daring acts of corporate espionage, creating a new monopoly from a stolen secret and a hidden map. The legend is vivid. Emperor Justinian I in the 6th century is said to have dispatched 2 Nestorian monks who had traveled widely in the East on a clandestine mission. They returned from their long journey with silkworm eggs, or possibly larvae, concealed inside their hollowed-out pilgrim staffs. They also carried the closely guarded knowledge of mulberry cultivation and the intricate process of sericulture. Whether this precise tale is true or a simplification of a more complex intelligence operation, the outcome was real. Byzantium successfully transplanted the entire silk industry within its own borders, breaking the Chinese monopoly through biological theft. But possessing the worms was only half the battle. They now needed a secure, independent supply chain for the finest raw silks and dyes that still came from the East, one that completely bypassed their Persian and Arab rivals. This is where a second, less famous but equally critical, layer of secrecy emerged. The Byzantines cultivated and protected clandestine overland routes far to the north. They negotiated complex alliances with Turkic cognates and other steppe peoples, establishing trade through the Crimean Peninsula and across the Caucasus Mountains. These were treacherous paths far from the established and now hostile Silk Road, traversing lands of shifting loyalties and harsh climates, the knowledge of which chieftain to pay, which mountain pass was safe in which season, and how to navigate the politics of the Black Sea's northern shores became a classified diplomatic and logistical protocol. State-sponsored merchants, acting almost as intelligence officers, maintained these fragile connections. The routes themselves were state secrets, their details never committed to any widely circulated map. This northern corridor became Constantinople's private back door to the riches of Asia. The result was a breathtaking economic transformation. Byzantium did not just break a foreign monopoly, it created a formidable domestic one. The imperial government centralized all aspects of the new industry within the palace complex, controlling production, setting exorbitant prices, and turning silk into a powerful tool of foreign policy. They could gift it to allies or withhold it from enemies, using fabric as a weapon. For centuries, the secret of the worms and the secret of the northern route together allowed the Byzantine Empire to wear its sovereignty quite literally on its sleeve. This episode reveals a pivotal shift in the logic of monopoly. When you cannot control the original source, you can steal the recipe and then build an entirely new, hidden highway to sustain it. The greatest trade secrets are sometimes not about finding a path, but about having the audacity to draw a completely new one on the map in invisible ink. A navigator's knowledge was no longer just his own. In the bustling port cities of the Indian Ocean and the Mediterranean, the guardians of the sea lanes organized themselves into something far more durable than a family or a single ship's crew. They formed guilds, powerful professional brotherhoods that turned the art of secrecy into a formal, self-perpetuating institution. The master, known as the Ma'alim in the Arabic-speaking world, was not merely a skilled captain. He was a member of a closed and respected community, a keeper of mysteries that were the collective property of the guild itself. This was the ultimate evolution of navigational secrecy, moving from whispered family traditions to a structured corporate system designed to last for centuries. In Venice, the heart of this system beat within the walls of the Arsenal, the vast state-owned shipyard that was the engine of the Republic's maritime power. Here, the guilds of shipbuilders, caulkers, and most importantly, the pilots, operated under a strict code. The precise knowledge of how to navigate the treacherous currents and shifting sandbars of the Adriatic, the secret shortcuts through the Greek islands, and the optimal sailing times for reaching Alexandria or Constantinople were not written in any public manual. They were held within the guild, passed down through a rigid apprenticeship that was as much about oath-keeping as it was about skill. A young man entering the Pilots Guild would spend years not just learning the stars, but learning the rules of silence. He would be taught the guild's proprietary charts, which were often annotated with cryptic symbols understood only by initiates, and he would come to understand that his future income, his social standing, and his very identity were tied to protecting that data. The guild's power was absolute. They controlled licensing, meaning no one could legally guide a merchant vessel in or out of the harbor without their approval. They dictated training, ensuring that the next generation was fully indoctrinated into the culture of secrecy before they ever took the helm, and they ruthlessly policed their own. The penalty for leaking a chart or describing a hidden channel to an outsider was not a fine, it was permanent expulsion. For a pilot, this was a social and economic death sentence. It meant the loss of his livelihood, his reputation, and his place in the only community that could grant him the authority to work. This powerful deterrent turned every guild member into a vigilant enforcer, knowing that one person's loose tongue could collapse the value of the knowledge held by all. This institutionalization achieved something remarkable. It made the secret of the route immortal. No longer did a trade route risk vanishing with the passing of a single aged captain. The guild became a living library, a corporation that owned the intellectual property of the sea. The knowledge was now bigger than any one person. It was a shared asset, maintained and defended by an entire organization whose continued prosperity depended on its protection. We can see this in a trade that seems humble compared to silks and spices, the Baltic herring trade. For centuries, the Hanseatic League, a powerful consortium of merchant guilds from northern German cities, held a near-total monopoly on the harvesting and distribution of this vital source of protein. Their control was not just about fishing rights, it was about the logistical routes. The guilds knew the precise timing of the herring migrations, the safest harbors for their processing ships in the stormy Baltic, and the most efficient sailing schedules to get the salted barrels to markets across Europe before they spoiled. This was mundane, essential knowledge, and the Hanseatic guilds guarded it with the same fervor as any spice merchant guarded his charts. By institutionalizing that knowledge, they turned a seasonal catch into a year-round, continent-spanning enterprise, funding the rise of powerful city-states like Lübeck and Hamburg. The guild system proved that the most enduring monopolies were not built on rare treasures, but on the organized, silent control of the ordinary paths that fed and clothed the world. The humble herring funded cathedrals. In the cold, grey waters of the North and Baltic Seas, the most powerful economic force for centuries was not a king or an emperor, but a fish. The Hanseatic League, a sprawling network of merchant guilds from cities like Lübeck and Hamburg, constructed a commercial empire of astonishing scale upon a foundation of salted herring. Their monopoly was a masterpiece of logistical control, proving that absolute power could be extracted from the most ordinary of commodities, provided you owned every step of its journey from sea to table. At the heart of this system were two closely guarded secrets: the location of the annual herring bonanza and the precise maritime highways to bring it to market. Each summer, colossal shoals of herring would migrate into the sound between Denmark and modern-day Sweden, a region known as Scania. This event transformed the coast into the greatest fish market in medieval Europe, the Scania Fair. But the Hanseatic grip was not merely on the fair itself. Their true power lay in knowing exactly when and where the fish would arrive, a schedule written in the currents and water temperatures, knowledge honed over generations. Their pilots possessed an intimate, proprietary map of these northern seas. They knew the safest and fastest passages through the treacherous Danish straits, where shifting sandbars and sudden squalls could wreck a vessel in moments. They understood the peculiarities of the shallow Baltic, its complex currents and hidden rocks. This was not general seafaring knowledge. It was a specialized, route-specific expertise that turned a dangerous voyage into a reliable commute. To transport this perishable bounty, the League perfected a tool, the cog ship. With its broad hull and single square sail, the cog was not the fastest or most elegant vessel, but it was perfectly designed for the conditions. Its spacious hold could be packed with salt and then filled with layered herring, creating a floating factory that could process the catch at sea. This allowed Hanseatic fleets to operate with ruthless efficiency, staying on the fishing grounds longer and getting their preserved product to market sooner than any local competitor. By mastering this entire chain, from the timing of the migration to the design of the ships and the secrets of the sea lanes, the League created a network so efficient it could undercut everyone else. A merchant in Cologne or Prague could buy reliable, affordable salted herring from the Hanseatic warehouse, a vital source of protein for fasting days and winter months, while local fishermen struggled to compete. The Hanseatic monopoly was enforced not by gates or guards, but by a superior map. They demonstrated that control over a regional maritime geography, even for something as simple as fish, could build city-states, fund magnificent brick churches, and dictate the diets of a continent. This mastery of a humble route invites a final, sweeping question. What force could possibly dismantle such deeply embedded systems of secret knowledge? The most advanced navigation tool could be a perfect decoy. An astrolabe, a beautiful brass instrument of arcs and dials, was more than a way to find your latitude by the stars. In the hands of a closed guild or a state-sponsored explorer, it became part of a locked system, a piece of hardware rendered useless without its proprietary software. The device itself could be reverse-engineered, its craftsmanship copied by any skilled metalsmith, but the true power lay not in the engraved metal, but in the parchment codex kept under lock and key beside it. These were the correction tables and algorithms, the secret formulas that translated a measurement of a star's height into an actual position on the globe. A guild that frequented the routes between Venice and Alexandria, for instance, would compile decades of meticulous observations. They would create a custom table that accounted for local atmospheric refraction, the slight bend of starlight over their specific stretch of the Mediterranean, or the precise position of certain stars during the sailing season. This table was their competitive edge, a bespoke key that made their Astrolabe sing with accuracy, while a rival's identical instrument used with a generic table would whisper misleading numbers. Possessing the device without its tailored data was like having a sophisticated lock with no combination. You could see the mechanism, you could hold it in your hand, but the door to the accurate route remained firmly shut. This technological separation created a powerful firewall. Even if a spy managed to sketch the Astrolabe or steal one in a night raid, the mission was a failure unless he also seized the guarded ledger of calculations. The state took this principle to its logical extreme. In the chart rooms of Portugal's Casa da India or Spain's Casa de Contratación, the master maps and global tables derived from voyages like those of Vasco da Gama or Magellan were treated as crown jewels. They were state secrets with access restricted to a handful of sanctioned pilots. The instrument was a symbol of open exploration, but the data that gave it meaning was a classified document. This practice marked a pivotal shift in the nature of navigational secrecy. The monopoly was no longer just about a path hidden in the waves or a landmark kept in memory. It was now also about controlling the very mathematics of place, about owning the copyrighted truth of the sky as it applied to a specific ocean. It turned celestial navigation, the most universal of sciences, into a private dialect. The map was a declaration of war drawn in ink and gold. In the year 1502, a single sheet of parchment, the Cantino Planisphere, became the most valuable stolen object in the world. It was not a religious relic or a royal jewel, but a diagram of possibility, a state secret so vital that Portugal guarded its contents with the ultimate penalty. This magnificent map, commissioned for a Portuguese prince, displayed with shocking clarity the results of decades of perilous exploration. It charted the true shape of Africa, proving a sea route to the Indies was possible. It hinted at the vast landmass of Brazil, claimed just 2 years prior. Most critically, it laid out the precise sailing directions, the wind patterns, and the coastal profiles that were the very foundation of Portugal's emerging empire. To possess this map was to possess the key to unimaginable wealth, and to lose it was to risk everything. Yet, in a stunning act of espionage, an Italian agent named Alberto Cantino, working for the Duke of Ferrara, managed to bribe or deceive his way into obtaining it. He then smuggled it out of Lisbon, spiriting the crown's greatest treasure to its rivals. This was not merely theft, it was an act of geopolitical sabotage. The Planisphere did not just inform Spain and other Italian states, it empowered them. Overnight, it leveled a playing field that Portugal had spent fortunes and lives to tilt in its favor. Spain now had the coordinates, they could see the finish line, and they immediately entered the race, dispatching their own expeditions with the stolen intelligence in hand. The leak of the Cantino Planisphere did not just reveal routes, it detonated the very concept of navigational monopoly on a global scale. It proved that in the new world of ocean-spanning empires, a secret was only as strong as the paper it was written on, and that paper could be stolen. A master glassblower's hands could be worth more than his life. In the Venetian lagoon on the island of Murano, the Republic of Venice constructed a gilded cage for genius. Here, they perfected the art of crystalline glass and later the world's clearest mirrors, objects of such desire they could be traded for palaces. To protect this monopoly, Venice employed a dual strategy of containment so absolute it became legendary. First, they imprisoned the knowledge, the exact recipes for the silica, the secret mineral additives that created flawless clarity, and the precise temperatures of the specialized furnaces were guarded with a ferocity reserved for matters of state. These were not written down but passed from master to apprentice in the flickering light of the workshop. Second, and just as crucially, they imprisoned the people who held that knowledge. By decree, the glassmakers and their families were forbidden to leave the Republic. any artisan caught attempting to flee, or worse, sell his secrets to a foreign power like France or the Ottoman Empire, faced a final and severe penalty from the Council of Ten, Venice's feared security council. This turned Murano into a beautiful, isolated fortress. But a fortress needs a moat, and Venice's moat was the lagoon itself. The waterways leading to the island were a treacherous, ever-changing labyrinth of shallow channels and hidden sandbars, known intimately only to a select group of licensed pilots. The safe route to Murano, the path that brought in raw materials and carried out the priceless, fragile cargo, was a classified maritime document. A rival spy could stare across the water and see the furnaces glowing, but without the secret map of the lagoon's depths, he could never reach the shore, nor could a kidnapped artisan ever hope to guide an invading fleet back through the maze. This fusion was complete, a chemical secret locked inside a geographic secret, all defended by the ultimate human deterrent. Venice did not just make glass, they manufactured scarcity itself, proving that the most valuable route could sometimes be the shortest one, a few miles of shallow water made impassable by the simple act of keeping its chart a state secret. The whispered oath of a guild navigator found its voice in the law books of Venice. In 1474, the most serene republic did something unprecedented. It issued a formal statute declaring that if any person built a new and ingenious device within its territories, that device must be registered with the republic's government. Upon registration, the inventor would be granted the exclusive right to practice their invention for a period of 10 years. This is widely considered the world's first true patent law, and its roots were sunk deep into the same soil that grew the Murano glass monopoly and the secret lagoon charts. The law's purpose was explicit: to encourage brilliance by promising protection, to transform fleeting secrets into durable, legal property. This was the moment the ancient culture of guarding routes and recipes crystallized into a new framework for ownership. The idea that a specific piece of knowledge, a novel process, or a unique design could be a form of property that the state would defend, this was a revolutionary leap. It moved the defense of advantage from the shadowy realm of guild oaths and the threat of severe penalties into the clear light of public statute. The ghost of the master craftsman who dared not leave his island became the protected figure of the registered inventor. The proprietary map held in a pilot's mind evolved into the technical schematic filed with a government office. This legal innovation created the philosophical bedrock for everything that followed, for copyrights that protect creative works, for trademarks that guard a brand's identity, and for the modern non-disclosure agreement that binds an employee to silence. Every time a technology company requires a new engineer to sign a confidentiality clause, they are invoking a principle that would feel deeply familiar to a Phoenician captain guarding his logbook or a Hanseatic pilot memorizing the Baltic currents. The core transaction remains unchanged. Share your skill and your knowledge within our system, and we will grant you exclusive benefit and protect that knowledge from outsiders. The vessel has changed from a wooden cog to a corporate entity, and the penalty has changed from expulsion or a final consequence to a lawsuit for damages, but the fundamental human impulse to secure the value of a discovered path endures. What began as a way to monopolize a trade route to the Spice Islands became a way to monopolize an algorithm or a pharmaceutical formula. The legacy of those ancient navigators is not merely in the maps they drew, but in the very legal architecture of our modern world, an architecture built to answer one enduring question: how do we own an idea? The prestige of a master navigator was a lonely crown. For the individuals who held these world-altering secrets, their knowledge was not just a skill, it was a solitary responsibility that shaped every aspect of their existence. They walked through crowded ports or busy caravanserais carrying a silent, mental atlas that their community depended on for survival. One lapse in memory, one misremembered turn at a distant rock formation, could mean more than a lost shipment. It could mean the loss of trust, of status, and for those on the journey, a profound and irreversible outcome. This constant pressure to be perfect, to be the living library that never forgets a single page, must have been an immense psychological weight. Beyond the fear of error was the ever-present shadow of suspicion. A successful guide, wealthy from his exclusive knowledge, would constantly be watched. Rival merchants might offer staggering bribes for a single evening's conversation. Foreign agents could attempt flattery or threat to pry loose a crucial detail. Every stranger on the dock or in the market could be a spy. This cultivated a state of perpetual, low-grade paranoia, a need to guard not just charts but one's own words and associations. The very knowledge that brought them respect also made genuine trust with outsiders nearly impossible. Their world became smaller, defined by a circle of fellow initiates who understood the burden, and a much larger world from which they had to remain forever apart. The isolation was perhaps the deepest cost. They possessed a truth that could reshape kingdoms, yet they could never speak of it fully, not even to their own families unless they were chosen as successors. Imagine knowing the answer to a question every powerful person in your world is asking, and having to pretend you know only fragments. This created a fundamental separation from the rest of society. While others celebrated a ship's return, the Navigator privately relived the 100 silent decisions that made it possible, decisions he could never fully explain. His expertise set him on a pedestal, but the pedestal was in a room no one else could enter. The system, for all its economic brilliance, was built upon this quiet trade, exchanging a person's peace of mind for the security of a route. It reminds us that the invisible architecture of ancient monopoly was held up by individual human minds, each one a locked vault bearing the strain of the treasure inside. The scent of desert incense and the chill of the Baltic Sea spray have faded, but the lesson they carry is timeless. We have followed the invisible lines of power drawn not in ink on parchment, but in the deliberate silence between trusted whispers. These secret routes were the silent engines of empire, the true source of wealth for history's most lucrative monopolies. From the Phoenician captain sinking his logbook to the Venetian state patenting an idea, the pattern is unmistakable. Information has always been the ultimate currency, and controlling the how, the path, the schedule, the method, was infinitely more powerful than merely controlling the what. To know the way was to hold the key to the vault of the world. This ancient logic of secrecy did not vanish with the age of sail. It simply evolved, finding new landscapes upon which to inscribe its hidden maps. Look at our modern world of digital firewalls, encrypted data streams, and proprietary algorithms. We no longer guard the Monsoon timetable, but we fiercely protect the source code and the user data that fuel new empires. The terrain has shifted from physical geography to the architecture of information itself, yet the core human impulse remains unchanged. We still build walls around knowledge to create value, to secure advantage, and to write the rules of access. The story of these ancient routes is not merely a tale of forgotten trade. It is a reflection of a fundamental truth about power and innovation. It asks us to consider what invisible paths we travel today and who holds the maps. If this journey through the shadows of commerce and cunning has captivated you, there are countless more historical mysteries waiting to be unraveled. Subscribe to continue exploring the hidden patterns of our past, and we would love to hear your thoughts. Which of these ancient monopolies, from Tyrian purple to the Spice Islands, do you find the most fascinating? The conversation, just like the trade routes of old, continues in the comments below.